Hello and welcome back to the Blitz, your weekly high school football show covering all things Lorain County football, brought to you this year by First Federal Savings of Lorraine. I am your host, Marissa McNees of the Chronicle, Telegram, and WEOL, and we have a lot of week 2 to cover this week. Tons of highlights, some incredible wins from our Lorain County teams, a lot of big performances. But this week, we have to start off with a little bit of breaking news that happened after we filmed last week. Unfortunately, it was announced 2 of our local teams and 2 teams that were coming off pretty big wins in week 1 had their games canceled due to positive COVID-19 tests. It was Keystone, scheduled to take on Cloverleaf in week 2, but due to a positive test on the Cloverleaf side, that game had to be canceled. And Brookside, coming off a huge win and looking to go 2-0 for the first time in, I think it was 10 years. Unfortunately, had some positive COVID-19 tests and had to also cancel that game. Should not affect playoff implications should that become a thing down the line in the season. The OHSAA has made allowances, of course, expecting that these things are going to happen, as we saw last year. So a canceled game won't be made up for either of those teams, but it shouldn't affect anything later on down the line. As of now, our teams are scheduled to play, so keep your eye on Twitter, follow along at the Chronicle Telegram, go to chroniclet.com for any updates. But those games will not be made up, and hopefully we will see Keystone and Brookside return to the field very soon, as long as everyone stays healthy and safe. All right, tons of games that did happen that we do have to talk about this week. I am so excited to talk about this team. Got a big win after a really, really tough loss in week 1, a bounce-back win. North Ridgeville coming back and beating Valley Forge 21-20. It was the first win of the season for the Rangers, who fell to North Olmsted pretty handily in week 1. First-year coach Brian Morgan, you may recognize that name. He was the longtime head boys basketball coach, now taking over the football team. I'm so excited for his team. We got to catch up with Coach Morgan on the Saturday morning WEOL Sports Wrap-Up show, and he had so many good things to say about the way his team responded. It was a tough opponent. Valley Forge coming off a big win over Amherst, and North Ridgeville gave up the lead. It could have very easily been another game where the Rangers just sort of lay back and take the loss, but they pushed, they came back, they grinded out the win, 21-20. It was a huge win for the program. And of course, with this expanded non-conference schedule, before we get into league play, stacking up these wins is really important. Maybe not so much for conference implications, of course, but to see where your team measures up before you get into the meat of your schedule. So a big win and a congratulations to North Ridgeville for their win over Valley Forge. Another team picking up a huge win this week is the Elyria Pioneers after beating Elyria Catholic in the little backyard rivalry game last week. Elyria comes out and beats Bedford 14-6. Obviously not a high-scoring game, but a really good performance from Elyria. Talked with Coach Devlin Culliver, who was really proud of his team's defensive performance. They're playing really tough physical football right now, which is what he's been wanting to see his few years with the program after taking over a couple seasons ago. And we're finally starting to see that come together. They're 2-0 for the first time, and I think it was 4 or 5 years, so no small feat. And coming out of a conference like the GCC, this is a team that's, as Coach Culliver said, battle-tested. They've faced opponents like Menor and Medina. You've heard those names before in terms of Ohio high school football. Big programs that Elyria has faced every season. So they know at least how to compete against these teams, how to come out now and win these games where maybe they haven't before. So a big win for Elyria, who now heads into a rivalry week, a rivalry game that was on hiatus after Lorraine did not play in 2020, but the Pioneers traveling to Lorraine this week for what is sure to be an exciting game. And of course, in rivalry games, all bets are off. So while Elyria is very clearly trending up and Lorraine's still looking for their first win this season, it's a home game for Lorraine. You never know what's going to happen, so this is going to be one to keep your eye on to see if Elyria can carry that momentum through this final non-conference game of the season. One of the other big games in the county last week, a non-conference game for Avon taking on Medina. This is a game I think a lot of us had circled on our schedules. These are 2 powerhouse programs going against each other in a non-conference game. Avon traveling to Medina, not an easy place to play, and so a big game for the Eagles, who fall to Medina ultimately 34-17. It snaps a 25-game regular season winning streak for Avon, and it keeps Coach Mike Elder at win number 199. Of course, Coach Elder not super concerned with those individual accolades, especially for himself, but still notable nonetheless. So, of course, all they're concerned about is getting back on the winning side. They take on Glenville at home this week, the perfect opportunity for the Eagles to bounce back after a loss to a tough opponent. Medina, no easy team to beat, of course, especially on the road. They have a star in quarterback Drew Aller, who's committed to Penn State, and it showed that Avon just wasn't able to keep up a couple big defensive stands, and they couldn't really crawl back from their deficit. So again, Avon loses 34-17 to Medina and gets a chance to bounce back again this week against Glenville. A few more notable scores from around the county this week. How about those Columbia Raiders beating Vermilion 51-0? Vermilion had been coming off a pretty big win of its own going into week 2, and Columbia now winning in week 1 handily against Independence it was 47-10, beats Vermilion 51-0. They're obviously now outscoring opponents 98-10, 98 points in 2 weeks, pretty decent. If you remember, the basketball team this past season, I think, was averaging 100 points, something crazy like that, into February. And I think that might have rubbed off a little bit on the football team, who was looking for a strong start after starting 0-2 last season. So they got what they were working for, 51-0 over Vermilion, and a big win. Again, that's going to be a team to watch, a team that I think is going to push Keystone in the Lorain County League. So definitely keep an eye on the Raiders. Avon Lake, another big win for the Shoremen over Brecksville, 41-14. I was on hand for that game, caught up with Coach Matt Kostelnik afterwards, who said, yeah, of course he was happy with the win. His team did play well, but they're not super happy with where their run game is at. Quarterback Jeremy Zick said, he can't fault his offensive line. They're playing perfect. He has no complaints. It's just a couple things. They're not quite clicking just yet. And once they do, he's pretty confident in his team's chances to go far this season, maybe meet Avon again in that regional final and get the win finally. But they have high expectations over in Avon Lake, and based on how they've played these first 2 games of the season, they're showing they're going to be the team to beat and possibly that top team in the SWC. Couple more scores we have to talk to. I did say it was an exciting week of football in Lorain County, so a lot to talk about. But how about Elyria Catholic? After losing to Elyria in week 1, coming back and beating Perkins, it was a really high-scoring affair. EC had given up the lead late, in the second half, and they bounced back. Their defense played well. It was their in a high-scoring game, you don't talk about the defense a lot, but Coach Brian Fox mentioned his defense played out of its mind. He was really happy with that performance, and of course that juggernaut offense that we've all heard of now. It's the trademark of EC, and Coach Fox said, it's all about heart, and that's what he wanted to see. And that's what it took to win that game against Perkins, to grind it out after a tough rivalry game in week 1. So EC getting its first win of the season. And another team getting its first win of the season in week 2 is Wellington. That's a team I did get to see in person in week 1 in a tough loss to Western Reserve. A lot of attention to detail missing, as they said after the game. Quarterback Ty Moore said, with all the senior leadership they have on that team, it was really disappointing. They lost some close games last season and really thought they could put it together this season. And well, in week 2, they did. They cleaned up the penalties. They focused more on the little things and were able to come out and beat Mapleton 29-20. It's a really big confidence-boosting win. In week 1, they put together some big plays, but that wasn't enough. They needed the win to really prove they're going to be able to hang in the Lorain County League this season, turn some of those close losses into wins. And so a big win for the Dukes in week 2 to get their first win over Mapleton, 29-20. Now, I got to pick a team of the week for this week, and I'm going to start giving myself away if I keep doing this, but I just get so excited to talk about these teams who get their first wins and in exciting ways. So, of course, our team of the week has got to be North Ridgeville, picking up their first win of the season after a really tough loss in week 1. It's a big win for the Rangers, a big win for the program as we start to get closer and closer into conference play. So a shout out to North Ridgeville, who gets this week's team of the week. I mentioned it a little bit earlier in the show, but we've got quite a few rivalries coming up this week. It's going to be another exciting week of high school football in Lorain County. You won't want to miss any of the coverage. And of course, we've got you covered here at the Chronicle Telegram and WEOL. You can listen to Elyria taking on Lorraine. The Titans return to George Daniel Field for the first time in 2021. That game will be on the radio on WEOL, AM 930, FM 100.3. For Stream 2, make sure you're turning into Vermilion taking on Firelands. Of course, another big rivalry game. Should be an exciting matchup. And then for our Medina County matchup this week, it is Highland taking on Brunswick. Of course, you can find all of that, plus schedules for the upcoming weeks on WEOL.com. And this week, we've got some Saturday high school football action for you. After you get your college football fix, make sure you turn into WEOL, where North Ridgeville will be taking on Normandy. I've talked about North Ridgeville a ton this week, so it's going to be a team that you're going to want to pay attention to. I'll be on hand for the game. You can follow me on Twitter for all your updates. Make sure you're turning into WEOL, but another exciting lineup of high school football for you coming this week. That is going to do it for us this week here at the Blitz. Again, brought to you this year by First Federal Savings of Lorraine. Make sure you're following the Chronicle Telegram online and in the paper all week this week for your coverage, your previews leading up to the game. And then on Saturday morning, be sure to pick up your copy of the Blitz. You cannot find high school football coverage like this anywhere else. You get game recaps, highlights, stats, box scores from all of our county teams. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you pick up your copy every week. Make sure you're following along at chroniclet.com. And until then, I'm Marissa McNees for the Blitz.